Good morning, everyone. My name is Larry Benson. I'm the marketing specialist here at NCSI. Today, for our webinar, we are discussing Avanti Asset Manager with Bryan Hadzik, NCSI's Chief Technology Officer, and Bryan Hoskins as NCSI's Director of Service Management. Bryan and Bryan will be presenting in Studio 3B. I've wasted enough time, so I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to the studio with Bryan and Bryan.
Okay, thank you, Larry. So good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Bryan Hadzik.
And I'm Bryan Hoskins.
And today we're going to be talking about asset management. This is something that we really like talking to our customers about. It is a big challenge that we're having out in technology today, especially when things like COVID happened and we picked up and sent all of our devices home and things like that. Really pointed out some of the weaknesses that we have inside of our asset management platform. So we want to talk about that today, trying to understand some of those challenges and walk you through the Avanti Asset Management tool and how it can potentially help solve some of those challenges.
So what do you mean by asset management, Bryan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me tell you a little bit about my history. I came from a systems management background. And so, I ran a system, Endpoint Manager from Avanti, used to be called, Landis Management Suite, similar to products like, SCCM. And I said, well, asset management is having an inventory of the device. I need to know that the device exists, right? So I scan the network and I find devices and I show the inventory. And in my universe, that was it. That was the end of asset management. If someone says, do you have that information? I said, well, sure, then I'm doing asset management. But I understand that's not the whole story, right?
That's not even close to the whole story, because when we talk about asset management, we need to be looking at a much broader view.
Right.
Inventory, or discovery, as you call it, with the inventory or the information that discovery tells us about an asset,
right,
only exists once that asset exists on our network, right? Or while we can still discover it on our network.
Yeah.
We may have scenarios where we've purchased assets that never made it to our network.
Sure.
We may have scenarios where assets have disappeared. We may have scenarios where we've gotten them from a receiving and they are sitting in an inventory that we don't know where what that looks like or where
right,
they're at. So discovery, although important, is a very small piece of the overall asset management puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like you pointed out, if that machine is not connected to VPN and it's at someone's house, I can't see it, I can't inventory it, I can't keep track of that. And then those devices that, don't necessarily plug into the network, or, I don't want to wait until they plug in, or, my boss comes to me and says, what laptops are we replacing next year? That's not necessarily something I can answer with just discovery, alone.
Right. And that's why we always have to start with financial, right? Whenever we talk about asset management, it's us technologists,
right?
We want to jump down here to this stuff, right?
Yep, the technology. That's what I'm comfortable with that. That's the world I want to play in, but that's not the whole picture, right?
But when we talk about asset management, so much of it is how much did we purchase, right? When did we purchase it? What does that look like? What does that life cycle look like? All of the different components associated with that, right? So we just want to introduce really quickly, we're going to be demoing the Avanti Enterprise Service Management Platform, right? Half of that is the incident, change, request, problem stuff associated with that. All sits on top of the Avanti Neurons platform, right? But today we're mostly going to focus on asset management, right? So we're not going to touch much on the service management side of the platform from here, but let's talk a little bit about what does financial mean when we start looking at assets.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good question. That's what the CFO is coming and bugging me about, right?
Right. So we're talking about the asset procurement process. What does that look like? Now, part of the service management is that in front of a lot of that financial side of it is a request for an asset, right? Somebody needs to start that life cycle by saying, I need a new desktop, PC, tablet, whatever it happens to be, right? So that's where the service management side does come in, right? But then we start with the financial components of ordering that, getting a PO, going through that approval process. Now, we do have customers using Avanti's platform as a PO process, but I would say that's the vast minority. Most of the customers have a PO processing tool, ERP tool that goes through and does all of that kind of stuff. So how do we get that data? We integrate,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's a simple export and an import, we can then go through that integration process, or whether it's an API for a real-time, kind of connection for those components.
Right. So that data already exists in right now today in when it's being purchased, how much we're paying for it, all of that pieces of information, they exist in my purchasing system today. The problem is that, well, I've got my Excel spreadsheet of all my assets over here and they don't really line up, right? And so being able to tie that purchasing record right over to the actual record of the device itself is absolutely key. You mentioned even one of the things around, what happens if a device never showed up? I bought it, I paid for it, I've got the purchase order, but then it never arrived on my doorstep. How would I have known those kinds of things?
Yeah. And that's why when we get into a lot of these projects with customers, they get in and we start talking about, and they focus here, right?
Yeah.
Discover, go tell me what's out on my network, and we can go through and do that. And that's a great start for a lot of customers. Maybe
Sure.
they don't even have that level of components or that level of maturity in there.
Right.
But if we discover 4,000 laptops or desktops on a customer's network, that's great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if they bought 6,000?
Yeah, I think that's a great encapsulation of what asset management is, deciphering even potentially the difference between what we're buying and what we actually have, because there might be some discrepancies in there. So that's a great way to separate out the inventory and discovery. And we're not trying to downplay those two aspects. Those two aspects are important, but we don't want to stop at that and think that's the end of the journey of just saying, well, I found those devices on the network.
Yeah. So once we've purchased it, then we got to work about receiving it, right?
Yep.
So receiving is going through that process of tracking the shipments, making sure we ordered 10. That might come in 3 different shipments over the course of several months.
Right.
We want to be able to track that receiving process, what that looks like, making sure that we're getting them in. And once we get them in, where do we put them?
Yeah, we put them in stock, right?
We put them in stock.
Yep.
Right. Had a customer that we started this process with, and the reason that we were brought in is because the help desk manager got 14 new laptops, right? As he got those 14 new laptops, he set them aside somewhere in stock.
Right.
Right. And then at that point, he came back 2 weeks later and says, these are my laptops. They're for marketing. I'm going to go do that. 2 weeks later, he comes back. All 14 are gone.
Yep.
Doesn't know where they went. They might have went to marketing. They might have went to finance. They might have went to sales.
It might have been stolen. We don't know. That's the fundamental problem. We don't know what happened with them.
Right. And so that's a big process. Part of this is making sure that we get stock, tracking that, receiving, and then as we go through and assign it, and then it goes through its life cycle, right? Now, part of that life cycle is inventory and discovery.
Right. So now once it's out in the field, we've handed that laptop to that user, it's kind of going and doing its thing. We want to keep tabs on it. We want to, ensure that we know where it's at and what its inventory is through that life cycle. Because, in a perfect world, you'd hand it to Bob and Bob would take great care of the laptop and return it always perfectly. But, asset management, we're having to deal with when the system doesn't work. And so it helps try and solve those problems.
And that's why the life cycle might go back to stock, right?
Yep.
We might have something that Bob is using. Bob leaves the company, gives us the laptop back. We put that back in our inventory to be able to give back to somebody else that's in there.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that this whole process helps us with is asset hoarding.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We've had that problem before. So, I'm a division leader of the organization. And last time I hired 10 new people, it took them a month to get laptops. So when I had a couple of people quit, I'm keeping those laptops. I'm hiding them. I'm not giving them back to you because I'm going to use them for next time. Well, that's not what should be happening, right? That's the hoarding process. And that's a very common problem that we have in asset management.
Yeah. So as that goes through all of its life cycle, we've always traditionally focused asset management. We get on lots of calls with customers that say we want asset management.
Right.
And this is where they've been talking.
Right.
We're trying to get them to see the whole life cycle, which at the end of that whole life cycle also includes disposal.
Yeah.
Right.
Keeping track of it, even maybe the asset doesn't exist anymore. It's been melted down for scrap. But my accounting department's going to come to me and say, hey, I need to figure out what fixed taxes you're paying for property tax for all these assets from last year. Well, if I melted it into the ground, I need to know about that. I need to understand about that asset, even though it's no longer in use.
Well, and not only that, let's say we give it to somebody, right? Maybe we donate it to charity or whatever that happens to be, to a school. And then 5 years later, that asset shows up in a landfill.
Yep.
Right. The EPA is going to then turn around and look at the serial number, and they're going to come back to me and say, you purchased this asset.
Yep.
Right. And if we can't prove that we've disposed of that in a proper way with a proper person, we're going to get a big fine out of that.
Absolutely. I want to ask a question. You mentioned about the process, and how we can help set up this process. Can you kind of expand upon that, how this might be a little bit different from some of the other technologies that we're doing out there?
Well, so absolutely. The one thing I want to point out is that asset management is 80% process and 20% tool.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we feel like Avanti has a great tool for asset management.
Sure.
It has the features to be able to let us to do all of this kind of stuff.
Right.
But if we don't have process figured out, if we don't have those business components decided and configured, we can help with that.
Right.
But if we just implement a tool without that, then we'll be a year, 2 years away, and we'll be like, well, this was a failure. What's the next tool we're going to go buy to fix asset management for us, right?
Yeah, tools don't fix this problem. You use that example of the 14 laptops for marketing. This is just software. It can't, put a lock on those laptops. We need to change the process, the culture of the organization, that you don't just go take stuff out of the stock room. You have to, go and assign it out, and you've got to understand if it's, available in stock versus it's already assigned to someone and things like that. So one thing that you're going to do is go on a journey with us of this asset management journey, and we're here to help. There's not really ever a finish line. We're never going to say, well, that's finished, we're done. No more needing to refine it and improve it over time. And we're here to help you create that process if you don't have one. We follow some great standards of, the International Association of IT Asset Managers. We can tell you, hey, here's how you should be looking at it. And help the tool adapt to those, processes that you create. But at the end, it's only as good as the adherence to that process. And so what we've found is we need to make sure that we have, buy-off from management. If everyone just goes around these rules and we don't have any teeth in the process, it's not going to help. But what we found is no one ever says, well, let's not have a process. Let's just do nothing. From the CEO, the CFO, CIO, everyone says, well, of course we should have asset management. We should have a relatively rigid process that everyone follows. So it's pretty easy to get the concept of that process buy off. The hard part is getting everyone to then go and adopt it, to actually follow through on that process. So make sure that you've got that management layer approving that, hey, you can't just take those laptops. You can't just buy this stuff and not tell us. And then we, help implement it in the tool.
And a part of that is that somebody's name, somebody's job role gets defined as IT asset management. Right? It's not part of finance. It's really part of IT that needs to be controlling and managing our IT assets. But I do want to hit on something that you just mentioned there.
Sure.
You talked about the International Association of IT Asset Managers.
Yeah.
Right. That's a governing body, kind of a best practices body that is there to help you with those processes. They have training. They have all of the different, best practices to help with that. So if you're not familiar with that, go ahead and search that International Association of IT Asset Managers. And then you can go through and get access to their curriculum, get a membership, go to some of their classes. Really helpful for those who are starting this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd steer you towards that. Kind of think of it like ITIL that we have on the ITSM side of the house. It's, kind of like that helps establish some standards and so forth. So definitely something you should research into it. Again, this kind of technology is not like other technologies where we see an obvious problem, we buy it, we turn it on, and then it solves the problem. We're trying to correct a process here. And so it's a little bit longer of a journey. Having a good roadmap is always very, very important to start with. If we don't know what that looks like, if we don't have good purchasing information for our laptops from the last 3 years, then let's not set ourselves a goal of saying, let's have great reporting of those laptops the last 3 years, because the data is not there. A lot of times we're talking to customers about, hey, the past might be very rocky. We've got to say from here on forward, we're going to start doing a better job at asset management, have that data collected. Whereas in the past, it might be, a little rough.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
Right. We've talked a lot about asset management. I'm sure we have a lot of customers that are on this. I haven't seen the list, but a lot of customers that are on this who are either service management customers from Avanti, or obviously they have other platforms doing that role.
Yeah.
And part of that is the CMDB.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk about what is the CMDB versus asset management.
Yeah, so you already took this off the board. We had it under the service management. So from an ITIL perspective, I understand CMDB, configuration change, configuration management database. It's for change management, right? It's a very technical oriented, cares about things like, lockout windows and what server is connected to another server. That's what I know CMDB as. What part does that play inside of asset management?
Well, CMDB, if you were to go look at the definition of it, cares about an asset while it's delivering a service. Right. That means while somebody is using it to go through and access their email or connect to some website or do whatever it happens to be that is being used in the service. CMDB doesn't necessarily care about this part of it and this part of it, right?
Yeah.
All of these things that are happening before a user gets a laptop, CMDB doesn't care about that. In fact, it shouldn't be in the quote unquote CMDB because it doesn't exist. It's just not delivering a service.
Right.
And then it doesn't care about it after it's being used for a service, right?
Sure.
But it does care about inventory and discovery and life cycle about that asset while it's going through and being used from there. So if we were to talk about asset management from this asset perspective, not from a types of things that go in there, but from an asset perspective, asset is a superset of the CMDB.
Right. Okay. So it includes everything that's in the CMDB, but it includes more than that because of things that are not yet ready, like something I've just purchased. Heck, I don't even have a serial number for it yet. I don't even know who it's assigned to or anything like that. I just know I have purchased 27 laptops. I still want that in my asset repository, but I don't necessarily need it inside the CMDB. Is that right?
That's right. Right. Now, within Avanti, our asset management repository and CMDB are one.
Okay.
Right? So we have that holistic view of all of that configuration that's there and be able to do that. Other tools may have a separate CMDB versus an asset repository to manage that, and they synchronize that kind of stuff in there. I do want to point out, it's not that everything that is asset is in the CMDB. There are things that are in the CMDB that are not assets.
Sure. What would be an example of that?
A website.
Okay, so a website, that's not really an asset. It's a service from an ITIL definition perspective. It's absolutely a service that it's providing, but it doesn't have a serial number. I don't assign it to a user. I don't have a warranty on it. It's a different kind of a thing. So,
and then there are assets that shouldn't be in the CMDB.
Right. What would those be?
A software license.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So again, same thing. It's not doing that same kind of service delivery. But are we compromising something by using the CMDB? Am I going to have to go and teach all of my asset people, all the intricacies of how a CMDB works?
No. So with Avanti and any other good tool that would do this, is that we're going to go through and show people the relevant information for those assets or CIs based upon the role that they have selected. So if I'm coming in as a role as an asset manager, I'm going to be going through and seeing things from an asset perspective. If I'm going in from an operational perspective, from the CMDB view of that, then I'm going to be seeing those configuration components.
So an asset manager doesn't care about lockout windows. So let's not show that to them. And maybe on the opposite side, a change administrator, maybe they don't care about the warranty. So let's not necessarily show them that. So we can hide what we don't think is necessary to that user, even rebrand it. Let's not call it a CI. A CI makes sense to me. I understand, the CMDB, but if I get someone to log in from accounting, they don't know what a CI means. So let's change the name of it. Let's call it a hardware asset. It's I know exactly what that is. And I love that idea that it's not two separate databases that then I have to synchronize. I don't have to go and import it and worry about duplicates and things like that. It sounds like this can be my single source of truth for those IT assets.
Yeah, and that's the great ability with Avanti and the Neurons platform is that it all comes through from there.
Okay, sounds great. All right, I think I have a pretty good understanding on some of the concepts and so forth. How about we walk over and take a look at it in the console?
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Just make sure that I have not cycled off of my login. Okay, so you'll notice here, I'm actually logged in as Mr. Hadzik. So you can see a couple of different roles that are assigned to him right now. I'm going to go ahead and switch that over to an asset administrator so we can get to some of the admin functions as well. All right. But you can see, first of all, based upon my role as an asset administrator, I've got things like our standards catalog. I've got hardware assets. I've got software assets. I've got our stock management. I've got purchase order integration, all associated with that kind of from there. As you come through and look at this, all of the different dashboards would be available to me at my home screen. So whether I wanted to look at this is a very good one. Asset exceptions. Where are assets that we do not have a location, or they're not in the right location as associated with where they should be? Where we have an asset user exception, where we've assigned it to Bill, but Nancy's actually the one logging into it. Things that do not have a disposal record associated with them, but are disposed in their life cycle. So just examples of where we can go through and start to see some of that. What are we looking at from a contracts perspective and the different contracts that are supporting the assets that are here, right? So all of our dashboards are available here at the home, and all of the different reporting components that you can kind of pull in from there as well. We have a full reports module that I'll show you a little bit later. So let's start with hardware assets. Now, again, you'll see this is our CI configuration. You'll be able to see all of the different details along those lines. But as an asset administrator, I'm going to be focused much more on the asset side of this. So you'll notice we have asset type with subtype. So computer with server, desktop, laptop. We'll have general assets. We'll have infrastructure assets. Even in this case, have some medical devices and things that are being visible there as well. So if I go through and look at this, let's go to a particular server. I have this depot server. This happens to be a physical server, not a virtual server. We do have virtual servers in here that I can show you here in just a minute. But from this perspective, we're looking at actual physical server. You see some of the base details of this: name, asset, serial number. Serial number is going to be that very primary key that we use to make sure that we're federating data from lots of different data sources about this particular asset, all of the different components from there. Its asset subtype is a server. Notice there's also a separate subtype for virtual server to be able to manage all of those pieces that go along there. And then we have a catalog item. A catalog item allows us to go through and look at, in this case, our standards for this server type is an HP ProLiant DL380 Gen 10, right? We can go through and I'll show you this catalog item here in just a minute, but this then defines manufacturer, assigned model, and all the other pieces that are below the catalog item. Then we have the assigned user. Now this is a server, so it's not going to be assigned to Bill or Nancy or Frank within the organization. It's assigned to our internal services or admin team kind of from there. Excuse me, let me get a drink of water here. Okay. Then we can go through see assigned location. Now there is a difference also between assigned user and login ID. That is going through and starting to see, our assigned user is who we think should have it. Our login ID is who's actually logging in associated with that. And then our location being in our London office, right? Then we've got status and assignment. We can put any kind of security policies or regulatory policies that are set against that. Purchase date, asset age, warranty information, and barcoding capability all within the platform. Now, this first page is going to be the same whether I'm coming in from an asset view or a system management view to see that. And discovery would be the same as well. And that's where it starts to diverge after that. So here you see discovery information about this. Notice it's still got the assigned values of HP, but then it's also got the discovered values as to where do we see it's being logged in at, who's logging in, what's the manufacturer model from the discovery. You'll also notice this was discovered last by the Avanti cloud, right? And then we're able to see discovery information, CPU information, OS information, memory, storage information against that from that discovery side of it. We also can see licensable software. Now, this is dependent on the discovery engine that we're using to populate that licensable software and kind of work from there. And then all installed software is visible associated with that. So details, discovery, licensed software, all this is going to come from that discovery and tools that we use based upon that. Then we have what other assets that are assigned to this user. In this case, we have a lot because it's a server assigned to internal services. So it's another example of where a big server would be sitting against all of those different things. We also have relationships to be able to see what's upstream and downstream. But then let's really focus on what does this hit from a asset management? Well, We have some contracts that are applicable to this. So a purchase contract when we actually purchase these servers. We also have a maintenance contract that's a set associated with that, where we can go through and see, maintenance components associated with them. So I'll come back to contracts a little bit later. We have vendor management, right? So what vendor is this? And if I were to go to that vendor, we would be able to see, here's everything that we have going on with that vendor. From what kind of standing are they in, and the HP is in good standing with me on this. I would be able to see what contacts are a part of that, as well as what contracts that we have with that vendor. How many assets have we purchased from that vendor, and what purchase orders have we sent to them? All is going to be in there, a part of that contract management piece of that, in the vendor management from an asset perspective. We have vendor scorecards. So every time we have interactions with the vendor, we would be able to see, how have they supported us against that? And if we go through and have a support case or a new support information on there, we can see communication, reliability, quality, and we can rate them. And that rating would then be listed over the course of time to see those vendors who are performing well and those who are not. Then we have our finance side of it, where we can go through and start to see integration into procurement information. We're looking at, what PO was used to purchase this asset. And we would be able to go through and have that integration to a procurement system, or Avanti could be a procurement system for customers who don't have one already in there. You see, we have financial owner, with also being able to go through and do, salvage value, market value, and it will do straight line depreciation right out of the box from that. And then we also have financial transactions, so we can see total cost of ownership of this particular asset over time, right? So what I'm going to do is jump back and let's find a laptop from Mr. Hadzik. So we'll go in, find all of the assets that are assigned to Bryan Hadzik, right? Here you can see a couple of laptops. Let's go ahead and drag and grab one of these Lenovo ones. So here you can come through and start to see from this perspective, we're looking at a laptop now. Notice it's assigned to Bryan, but if we come over here to the discovery information, right, we can see that actually Susie is logging it. So Bryan's the asset hoarder who has got it and given it to somebody else within his organization to be able to kind of go through and manage that. So I have that kind of information as part of that discovery piece that's there as well. Again, you would see the time that we purchased this particular asset, what vendor we purchased it from, which was CDW, even though the manufacturer is Lenovo, right? And then we would be able to see, here's that purchase order. So if I were to go to the purchase order, we would then be able to see on that, we were able to go through and buy the following assets, one desktop and one laptop that were purchased on that. And apparently they were very expensive because it was a $13,000 purchase that we did for those two assets, right? But you can go through and start to see that also. And not a lot of customers get to this level, but it does have the ability to come in here and start looking at like invoicing. So we can track what invoices are coming through in the process and making sure that we're not getting over invoiced from there. We can also come in and track shipments if you wanted to track what shipments are coming and which of the shipments are being there for receiving of individual assets that are there. Okay, so we have all of that component that's there. Now, part of this asset is also the catalog, right? So let me go over to the catalog for this. Now, the product catalog is our standards. So these are what we've gone through and defined as what we can buy in our organization. So whether it's a Lenovo laptop or a Dell desktop or a MacBook Pro, whatever it happens to be, we're going to define that as the standard, and we're going to have where we buy it from, what is the model that we're getting, all of those kind of details are going to be here. So here you see that we have T460S. That's an example of a set associated with that. We can go through and start to see, how many instances of this do we have in our organization? So I have, 13 of those in here. One of them is assigned, and then you'll see I have a bunch of them on order that's not necessarily been received yet. So we would be able to know, hey, we have stub records associated with that. I also have one in stock, right? So stock allows us to go through and see what's in a stock room and kind of work through from there as well. So you can see all of that from that product catalog. I have what part of the organization, because not all assets would necessarily be available to all parts of the organization. Maybe an engineering laptop that is a higher spec laptop would only be available into the R&D organization or whatever that looks like from there, right? So you have all of that. And then we have approved vendors and we have suggested alternatives. Okay, looks like we do have a couple of questions before I jump into the next thing. We said, would a vendor scorecard be used by the procurement group? Absolutely. Yeah, the procurement group would be able to then go through over time and say, from a vendor management, yes, here's all of the scorecards that we've had from them, and start giving them feedback on that. Say we need more, support, whatever that happens to be, as part of the procurement group. And as you have interactions with them as a procurement group, you can also rate them onto that. And that's actually under, if I'm in here on a purchase order, and let me just grab a purchase order, right?
And Brian, this could be used for like negotiation, right? You
Yeah,
could go
absolutely.
back, Dell's coming in trying to sell you laptops. You pull up the procurement or the scorecard and say, look, I've got 9 interactions with you, all of them bad. Convince me why I should be dealing with you.
Absolutely. So we can go through and make that support there. And you see here, right on a purchase order, I can go through and say, here's my interaction with them on this particular purchase order as well. Okay.
So another question here, Brian, would you also have catalog items for CIs that are no longer purchasing, but that you have in your system?
Yeah, absolutely. And I went over that pretty fast, but you'll actually notice that there's a status up here, right? And so that status could go from no longer purchasable, right? So we still need to have it. We want to know we purchased a type of model 2 years ago. It's still in use, has a 4-year life cycle on it. We still want to be able to track all of those details against that, but we can set it to no longer purchasable so that it's still available within the system.
And then down at the bottom, suggested alternatives.
And suggested alternatives where we would be able to say, we can't get this anymore, but we can get this alternate for that.
Great idea for supply chain issues of just not being able to get hardware in.
Yeah.
All right, one more question here. Do you have the ability to track things like monitors?
Yeah, so absolutely. Now, monitors is one of those things that's it kind of falls for some customers into the I want to track it from a serial number perspective, and then other customers are I want to track it from a simple I need to have enough monitors on hand to be able to give to people, but I don't want to track a serial number on there, right? And then we even have customers that are in between. I don't want to track it from a serial number, but I want to track that I've given it to this person, right? And so we can go through all levels of that. So, hey, I don't want to have somebody requesting a new monitor every 6 months, right? So if I don't want to track that, I can go through and do that. And that's part of the product catalog. If it's a monitor, we have a monitor type that you can go through and do. Or if it's the product catalog where I would be able to go through and say, for example, a new consumable. So not a serialized asset. We don't want to track it from a serial perspective. We would be able to go ahead and create a consumable component associated with that, right? So yeah, several of those components that we can do and manage all of that.
Okay, a couple more questions. Keep them coming, guys. These are good ones. What's a stub record?
Okay, did I say stub record? I must have said stub record. So a stub record is when we go through and do a purchase of an asset. So over here on a purchase order, let me go find a purchase order again. We've got a purchase order of some new laptops in here, right? So I've got a purchase of 25 laptops, POS terminals on here. Oh, this one doesn't look like it has stub records on it. But basically, when we go through and create a stub record, it's essentially, we've created a purchase. We've actually ordered this from the vendor, but we want to create a record of an asset that's on order. So we showed you in the product catalog for this Lenovo, we had a bunch of assets that were on order. We have no detail about that other than we know, let's actually go to the record. Other than that, we know that it's a model that we've ordered. We might not even have the serial number yet because it's not even that far along in the system. And there's an example of a stub record. It's just a computer name, it's a model, and it's on order. So until we get that back, we don't know any more details about that. So that's a good example of a stub record.
Okay, keep the questions coming, guys. Will we move on?
Yeah, okay. So I want to go through really quickly, talk about stock, right? Stock is a big part of this, being able to go through and control what stock we have and the inventory history of stock. So I'm going to come in over here to our Colorado Springs stock room, and you'll see we have a quick storage summary, but I can also come in here and look at assets and consumables. So here you can see in this stock room, I have 8 desktops, 2 consumables, 2 smartphones, and 2 printers that are going through associated with that. We can come in here and look at consumables. I have 14 Logitech mice. I have 9 keyboards from here that we can go through and look at that. So you can see all of the information associated with that. And then I would be able to see, if we have the facilities side of this, what facilities assets that are in there that we can go through and do that. And then we have an inventory transaction. So everything that comes in and out of this stock room, we have a tracking of who it was assigned to, who did it, and all of the different details on there. So we can go through and see all of that information, right? So you can see the inventory details on there. Looks like we got another question that says, future forecasting of items to be ordered for delivery. Yeah, absolutely. So when you're going through and doing that, you have a forecast of what you're expecting to be receiving. Talk to a customer that's in a migration to Avanti. They have 400 assets on order, right? But they're somewhere in the supply chain for delivery, even months that they've been in order waiting for supply chain to be there, right? And then I'm going to answer the next question here in just a little bit when we get to contracts. So I need to speed it up just a little bit, but I want to go through and show you that there is also behind all of this contract management, right? So we have contracts, we have maintenance, we have SOWs, we have NDAs with vendors. All of that kind of stuff is going to be here under our contracts. So for example, I'm just going to jump, we've been picking on HP a little bit today. So let's jump into HP. You can see within my HP contract, I have 3 line items. I have a purchase, a maintenance, and another purchase that are on here. I would be able to go through and look at those. Let's just take, for example, this maintenance contract. Under the maintenance contract would allow me to see things like, is it a renewable contract? What's the uplift? What are the different pieces that are there? What are the termination details? What assets is this contract for? I can go through and start to see all of that detail from here. So the contract allows me to see parent level contract, and then I'm allowed to see the components that are underneath that, or what we call a contract line item. And within the contract line items, there are entitlements, which is a software license, warranty, lease, maintenance, NDA, purchase, service support, and a volume purchase. So it's all there as part of that you can go through and do. And then the contracts and contract line items are a subset of software asset management. So we have software, for example, a Microsoft 365 agreement. All right, so let's just look up 365. And then we can go through and see, here's my Office 365 E3 agreement that can be here, where we can go through and start to see that. And then I can see that we have a contract line item, which is a software license or an entitlement that we've purchased for 525 assets with all of the different details that are in there. I see unit cost. And if I go to that entitlement, you would actually be able to see, here's all of the employees that have been linked to this, right? So we can see how many licenses we've purchased, what employees we've linked that to, what assets we've linked that to. That can be all there. Now, I do want to say really quickly before we get there, this is not an effective license positioning tool. It's a contract management, software contract management, governing renewals and things along those lines, not are we in compliance component. It has pieces of that, but compliance is so complex with things like, Office 365 lets you install it 5 times. Adobe lets you install it 2 times. And, just all of the different complexities that are in there. This tool doesn't do the effective license position. It does everything up to that for software license. So contract management, contract line items, software, and software line item or entitlements are all there as part of that. So looks like we have a couple of other questions. I hit the software one that we can do. Can we tie product catalogs together for the service? Yes. In the product catalog, you might have noticed that there is to create a bundle item. So a bundle item allows me to take two other product catalogs and put them together so that they can be requested in that self-service. And if I were to switch quickly over to the self-service side of it, this is where the users would be able to go ahead and select, I want to go and request something in that portal. If I were to go to our catalog and just look up a catalog, then you would see examples of requesting a bundled item, examples of requesting a hardware item, right? A mobile device, whatever it happens to look like from there. If I were to go request a bundled item, then it would allow me to see, here's the two bundles. I have an Office 365 Visio and an Adobe Illustrator and Acrobat that are created there. If I wanted to go through and look at something like a hardware request from the product catalog, I would be able to say, what do I want? I want a computer. What kind of computer? I want a laptop. It's then going to go out and find what are the available types of laptops that we have, Dells, HPs, Apples, Lenovo's that are all there. So it's all part of that.
That doesn't look like much, but that thing right there was actually really cool. Those who build request offerings know that the tedious part of building them, if something small changes, we got a new model or something like this, this is a generic request offering that references the catalog. So this request offering will stay the same all the time, and it just looks up based on my permissions and looks up what's in production. And we kind of already talked about that. And so this is a really cool reference list instead of having to rebuild the request offering every single time that we change makes or models.
Okay. All right, so we've gone through a lot. This was meant to be very high level overview associated with that. If anyone wants more deep dive and more detail, we're happy to do that on a separate individual demo. So reach out and we would be happy to do that.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, you've kind of seen the asset management side of the house and some of that process that we would help create. The biggest part that people always talk about is that discovery and inventory. How do I find those assets? Where do they come from? In the front door. We talked about, bringing them in as part of purchase orders and things like that. But what do I do once they're in the life cycle? I've got this laptop, I've handed it out to Bob. It's now out in the world. Now what? How do I keep track of that? I can't just say, well, the system says that it's great. I need to know what's going on with it. So a lot of customers have this kind of problem. They have lots of different data sources. You probably have some like this, hey, I've got Active Directory. It's notoriously bad. It's stale, doesn't keep things like the serial number. Maybe SCCM is doing your workstations, and maybe that's doing a good job at it, but maybe it struggles for remote when the devices are at home and they're not in VPN, or it doesn't know about our mobile devices and things like that. Maybe you're a VMware shop, and that provides you great information around the servers, but then not much else. Or Mobile Iron, same with mobile devices. So the problem is you have all of these data sources, and none of them are complete. None of them are good enough. And so if you were to bring them all up into the CMDB and into that asset database that we've been talking about, what would happen? You would have duplicates. They would really kind of dirty up your CMDB, your asset repository. Remember, they're the same thing in our world. So we have an optional component as part of our asset management platform called Neurons. Neurons is going to be the glue that brings all these together. We have these things called connectors to scoop up that information. And then we go park it in something called a data lake, and our data lake does cool things like gives us the deduplication. So we can only have a single record and some normalization where we clean up some of the data. Then we go bring that over into our CMDB. So now I am using all of these different data sources that are already existing out there. Excuse me. But then I'm also going to bring some from our agent. We actually have an agent you can put on your devices, on your laptops and desktops, things like that. And it can actually go out and probe the network, and look for other devices out there and report that information up, to Neurons and then up into the asset database. So that's an optional component. It also does some really cool real-time information. So I want to show you a tiny bit about what that looks like. Like I described, this is an optional add-on, and this can help solve some of the challenges of asset management. If you come back and say, the purchasing information, that's great and all, but I just need to know where the laptops are. I have that immediate problem right now. This tool can help solve it because it can be a little bit quicker to that realization. Here's my personal favorite is the map. I can show you real-time information about my devices. These are not made-up devices. These are real assets that NCSI has for different employees around the country. And it is all done in real time, and it's all done without a VPN. So if I go click on this device right here, it's actually going to go and real time probe that machine and see what's going on. Look, I've got CPU and memory information that was retrieved in what, a second or two? That's how long it took to click on that. And I can get a more detailed dashboard by going to the device dashboard. So Neurons does a bunch of other stuff that is not really asset management related, like remote controlling and patching and things like that. But what we're going to do with this is gather up that information around those devices and then have that available for me to use as part of a CMDB, use as part of a asset database, things like that. Those connectors that we talked are incredibly easy to set up. You've heard about horror stories of integrating with various products. Let me show you how easy it is. Here's a bunch of different connectors that we have. Things like AWS and Azure and Endpoint Manager and our Avanti Pulse Profiler, Jamf, Rapid7, Okta, Qualys, Tenable, Workspace ONE, VMware. Let's take VMware as an example. How would I connect to it? I go in here and I say, oh, well, we're going to connect to VMware. Here's my server name, virtual.local. I'm going to ignore certificate errors. I'm going to put in the username and password here. I want to gather that information once a day at 5:30 a.m. That's it. I'm done. So now I am gathering that information from VMware as it relates to my, not only just my service management, but also my CMDB and my asset management. They all kind of benefit from that. So again, Neurons is an optional add-on that you can have as part of an asset management project, or like I said, some customers even do it just as a standalone one, can answer some really cool questions around things like reconciliation. A lot of times you ask the question, hey, where do things exist in one database, but not in another database? So I can say things like this, devices that don't have an endpoint manager agent on it, or, show me when they're in Active Directory, but then I don't have an agent on it. And so I can use these different sliders and it'll pull up a list of what's going on there. I can also just ask it a question. We got a really cool natural language search. So I could type in here, show me things like firewall. It knows what I meant when I said firewall. It's doing a real-time query against my devices and what their firewall state is. Or, show me disk encryption. And it knows what that means. Look, we're doing even on PC and on Mac. And I can come back and tell you, hey, wait a minute, these machines right here are using BitLocker, but their C drive is currently set to not encrypted. Hey, that's a problem. That's something that I need to worry about. Okay, so that was a quick run through on Neurons, an add-on component that we have as part of it. We're going to kind of wrap it up here. It looks like we got one or two questions still left. We got one here about, is there an approval process when someone wants to make a request?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever we have a request, we have workflow sitting behind every request that we can go through and pull that, whether that's go find a manager,
right,
whether that's go through, had a customer went and said we needed their manager approval, but then it had to walk up that management chain. If it was over $5,000, it had to go find what they called a level 15 approver within their management chain to go through and to do that. And so, yeah, the system can do all of those kind of things. They can approve it through email. They can approve it through the portal, or even another customer went through and said, we don't want to have another approval portal. We already have an approval portal for X, so we did integration into another approval portal for them. So, yep, all kinds of approvals available.
And what that proves is it's built on that enterprise service management platform that has all of that, all of those rules and workflow that we're going to do on the service management side of the house. We didn't talk about that a lot today. We'll do a different webinar on that kind of goes through incident management, change management, those kinds of things. Well, a big part of that would be, request offerings where you would have approvals, and change management where you're going to have approvals. So since it's built on the same platform, we can just reach over and leverage it. Now, that doesn't mean I have to buy service management or use service management. You can absolutely just do asset management, just do service management. But since they are on the same platform, you will start to get some cool synergy when you're looking at both of them. Okay. So I really appreciate everyone attending here today. Hopefully everything worked out with your lunch. Just like we said earlier on, if you're having any problems with it, there's an email address here you can send an email to try and troubleshoot how that works. But this is our version of a lunch and learn. So hopefully we kept you fed while we talked a little bit about asset management. We have an upcoming webinar, same kind of thing, that's coming up here on March 16th. We did a little bit of a teaser today on Neurons, just a few minutes on it. We're going to expand it into, a lot of cool things around hyper automation, the real-time intelligence, and so forth. So, keep an eye out for an invitation for that coming up here on March 16th. And we want to also throw out the idea of giving everyone that attended today 50% off an asset management needs assessment. So, again, this is a really important part of the process of asset management, understanding what the state of your data is. You may have grand, lofty visions of what you want to do with asset management. Oh, I want a weekly report that sends the depreciation stats of all of the fixed assets in the state of Texas to the CFO. Well, if you don't have purchasing records, if you don't have asset records, you're not going to be able to do that. So us sitting down with you to try and better understand what the goal of it is, and where you want to go long-term, that assessment is going to have you be a lot more successful in, what the current state is and what the future state, potentially could be. So all you have to do is hit up your NCSI salesperson and tell them you want that 50% off on the asset assessment, and we will make that happen. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate it. Taking time out of your day. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.